The college football playoff is changing once again, but is it for the good or for the bad? We're going to hit you with a little old school PTI mixed with some around the horn today because, to no one's surprise, if you've been listening to ATB for the last year and a half, we're not going to agree on everything today. That's for sure. This is Always Talk Ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton. Let's dive right into it, Lance. This episode is going to be centered around the college football playoff and the impending changes. Ross Dellinger came out with an article a couple weeks ago, actually a couple days ago. Big news flash in this entire article that I took away was the fact that the Big Ten and the SEC hold sole discretion on the future CFP format beginning in 2026, which just coincides with the ESPN new TV agreement that runs through 2031. That agreement grants them decision-making powers, but it also, and if you're listening on podcasts, I'm going to use air quotes here, it directs them to have meaningful consultation and input from the other conferences. We all can probably get the picture of what those meaningful consultations with the other conferences are going to be with the Big Ten and the SEC. The changes are going to be going to either 14 or 16 teams. It consists of the SEC and the Big Ten getting 4 auto bids, the Big 12 and ACC getting 2 auto bids, the G5 getting 1 auto bid, and then whether it's 14 teams or 16 teams are going to be either 1 at-large or 3 at-larges. In the 14 teams, the top 2 seeds get buys. In the 16-team playoff, there's no buys. Lance, you're on record as of yesterday saying you love this.
Give me 16 teams, bro. I mean, we've already gone to 12, okay? We've already done it. And here is one thing that I think that almost everybody can agree on, which is not many things that people can agree on in today's society. But one thing that I believe that everybody can agree on is the format that they used this past year ain't it. It's just not. The 12-team format where you give the 4 highest-ranked conference champions the top 4 seeds and the way that they seeded the teams, that's not it. And I love the 16-team model at this point. Like, if we would have jumped from 4 to 16, I'm not sure that I would have been all for that. I think you and I both were on record saying that we probably should have gone to 8 right out of the gate. But just like our boy Josh Pate, who talked about how he definitely was never a proponent for expanding the playoff like it already did. But we're already at 12. Why are we going to just dip our toes in the water? Like, no, man, let's just turn a front flip over that big wave right out of the gate. Let's go to 16. And I'm all for that because if it's just left up to just automatic qualifying bids in each conference and you only get only one of the at-large bids, I like the deal where it's the 4-4-2-2, like you just talked about, between the Power 4 conferences, the 1 highest-ranked G5 champ, and then you have 3 at-larges. I like that model better. And no buys, the hell with buys. Let's more football. Give me more football. Give me more playoff football. Give me more games on campus. Because if you start doing buys, that's going to limit the amount of playoff games that we have, and it's going to limit probably the amount of home playoff games that we have. If you do a 16-team tournament and you have no buys, I believe that you will have at least 2 rounds of home games. And that, to me, is where college football separates itself from any other sport. There's a lot of things they do to separate themselves from any other sport, some not good. But the main thing that separates college football in a good way, in my opinion, is the passion, the pageantry, these home atmospheres and the tailgating and the crowds and the settings that you have in college football are second to none in any other sport. And getting home playoff games and more of them, I'd be good with that.
All right, so Lance loves it. I do not love it at all. We got some pros and cons to go over here.
Real quick, there's things that I don't like about it, and obviously we'll get into that, but go ahead.
Yeah, we got some pros and cons. Let's start with the pros, okay? Like you mentioned, more football. We get to consume more football. We get to watch more football games. Yeah, playoff football. That's always a good thing. I mean, it's always, fun to watch. Now, it's also going to pop up in the cons list later for a different reason, why that might not be a good thing. The CFP committee, their role in this would be greatly diminished.
Yep. Which I'm fine with.
That's something
a
that
pro.
everybody's on board with.
Yeah, that's a pro.
It sounds like obviously with 14 or 16 teams, they'd be going with just ranking the teams 1 to 16, and then that's how they would be seeded. Obviously, getting a G5 automatic spot in there, maybe, they're ranked 23, 24, whatever. So you're just ranking the teams as they should be seeded. So I think the less that committee of 10 or 11 people, however many's on it, the less that they have to do and we have to criticize them, then that's good for the sport.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, there's people that's already pointed it out. Some of the metrics that they use are almost the same that the BCS used before anyway. So I'm just like, well, why do we have them to begin with? Like, if you look at every single BCS, like the BCS know-how page on X that comes out that shows you what the BCS rankings would have been, every single year they've had a 14 playoff and a 12-team playoff. It's almost been the exact same. It's every now and then you have one or two, like small differences. And so, yeah, the less that we give them power, I think the better on that. And I mean, should we dive into yet, or should we table it for later on in the conversation about what this means for, according to Ross Dellinger and other talking heads of the sport like Josh Pate and like Joel Klatt talking about the conference championship games going away?
That was my next point was conference championship weekend. Now, 95% of the time, it's going to actually matter. Like, obviously, you got to buy and you got automatic qualifiers this last go round.
This part might be my favorite of this whole thing, by the way.
Yeah, both of those teams, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Texas, like they were all in. The Big 12 was the only game that had, a loser goes home.
De facto playoff game.
Yeah. So 95% of the time, conference championship weekend is actually going to matter.
Yeah, and how they're going to be doing this, again, allegedly, is we're going to have de facto playoff games now on conference championship weekend, and they're not going to be conference championship games. It sounds like what they're going to be doing is, like, let's just take the SEC and the Big Ten, for example. They're talking about getting 4 automatic qualifying bids. The top 4 teams from each respective conference will get into the playoff. So it sounds like what they're looking at doing is because you had coaches in the SEC this past year, and you had other coaches talking about how they didn't even want to go play in conference championship weekend because all it might do is actually hurt you for your chance and your seeding.
The coaches who said that, they didn't have to worry about that because they didn't make the playoff at all.
No, but I will give an example of what can take place, and it happened this year. The starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs, done for the year. His season over. And some of you people can debate, well, I mean, Gunnar Stockton still was almost just as good, or Beck, or Carson Beck, or whatever like that. That's not the point of the conversation. Like, what if Dylan Gabriel goes down for Oregon in the Big Ten championship when they're already the number 1 team in the country? Like that's the type of stuff that can happen in these conference championship games that these coaches who are already in the playoffs have a problem with. So what it looks like they're going to do, what they're going to do is whoever wins the regular season, the number 1 team at the end of the regular season, you're in the college football playoff. The number 2 team in your conference at the end of the regular season, you're also in the college football playoff. That is your reward for finishing first and second in your conference. You're in the playoff. You're not playing in a conference championship game. Teams who finish 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the standings in the SEC and the Big Ten, those teams will square off and will play on conference championship weekend, and we'll decide it on the field. Strap up the chin straps and see who the freaking best team is and who is going to get in the playoffs. Number 3 seed will play the 6th seed in the SEC, and number 4 will play number 5. Winners of those 2 games in the playoffs. Losers of those 2 games, you are now in amongst the pool of the other at-large bids.
Yeah, which is why I said 95% of the time it's going to matter, because there might be a scenario where, you got a team ranked number 3 or 4 in the country and they get upset.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like this past year, for example, like Tyler pointed this out, I think my version was better. But if you actually look at the standings, you would have had Alabama and LSU squaring off, and you would have had Tennessee and South Carolina, right?
Yep.
I think what it would have been. Tennessee and South Carolina would have been squaring off. But like if you look at like the actual rankings, which is not how they would have done it. Think if you would have had a situation going into the last weekend, we had all these debates of South Carolina and Ole Miss and Alabama and all that crap. What if we would have had Tennessee versus South Carolina in Knoxville and Alabama versus Ole Miss in Tuscaloosa, and the winners of those two games get in the playoff? Like how sick is like something like that? Like it is a de facto playoff game. Everything matters in that situation. Same thing in the Big Ten, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. I have no idea how they would do it in the ACC and the Big 12. My guess is that the number one teams at the end of the regular season in the Big 12 and the ACC would be in the playoff, and the number 2 seed and the 3 seed at the end of the regular season would play de facto playoff games against each other. And whoever wins that game gets the second spot of those conferences. Like this past year, an example of that would have been SMU would have been in for the ACC because they were undefeated in conference play. Miami and Clemson would have squared off to see who gets in the ACC, that second bid for the ACC. And BYU and Iowa State would have squared off in the Big 12 to see who gets in for the Big 12. So again, sign me up for that. That's probably my favorite part of all of this, because conference championship game weekend, we're going to have more games. It's going to have significant meaning. Significant. You can't get any better than win and you're in. Lose, you might be done. Might be, depending on how many at-large bids that they're giving out.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't be called conference championship weekend anymore. It'd probably be called conference play-in weekend, which, still the same thing.
Do or die.
Yeah, do or die weekend. Another pro that they came out with is better non-conference matchups between the Big Ten and the SEC, almost akin to like a Big Ten SEC challenge that they would do in basketball or something. Yep. Give me your thoughts on that.
All for it, man. Again, it's more meaningful football, but like I will say, like you and I were like, I'll admit it, Tyler and I were texting about it yesterday, kind of going back and forth. I mean, at this point, in this new model, non-conference games really won't matter as much, because like as far as like the meaning of them, truthfully, as far as getting in the playoff is concerned, because if you're taking the top 4 seeds from each conference at a conference play, then what does it matter? Like if you go lose a non-conference game, you're LSU and you go play USC in Vegas and LSU loses against USC, and then they go and finish in the top 4 in the SEC, they're going to have a chance to make the playoffs. That non-conference game is not going to matter at all. The only thing that it does as far as mattering at the end of the year would be seeding. Because if they're ranking the top 16 teams in the country, yeah, obviously if Alabama and Ohio State square this year, Texas and Ohio State squaring off this coming up year in Columbus. If Texas beats Ohio State in that game, they're obviously at the end of the year, if they have the same record as the Buckeyes, probably more than likely Texas will be ranked higher than Ohio State at the end of the year when the seedings are given out. So that matters then. But as far as the fan experience for us college football fans, seeing a game like Ohio State and Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan versus Ole Miss, or whatever, Tennessee versus Oregon, seeing the SEC and the Big Ten, those teams match up against each other instead of, no offense to the G5 squads, okay, but instead of watching Alabama match up against South Florida, I get to see Alabama match up against Oregon, or Alabama match up against Curt Cignetti in Indiana and Bloomington. Yeah. Or I get to see Ole Miss and, you get it, so on. Like, those are the type of matchups that we would get as a fan. I'm all for that. Like, that would be fantastic. And the other part is, Tyler, if you want, you can I wish you had some alcohol right now. You could take a big sip, clap your hands, because all of you fine folk that have just been begging for the SEC to go to a 9-game conference schedule, it looks like that you're going to get exactly that. Because that is also...
It only took it being done on their terms for them to go to it. So congrats.
Yeah, again, we could probably have an entire episode of me and you arguing about this part. But, I mean, I'll just go ahead and say, I'll go ahead and, I'll go ahead and talk about it.
PTI, baby.
Yeah, there was more SEC teams this past year that played Power 4 conference games or played as many Power 4 conference games as teams in the Big Ten, okay? Like, everybody praising teams in the Big Ten because they played 9 conference games and going up against Northwestern and Purdue and playing 3 MAC schools in your non-conference, as opposed to an SEC team playing an 8-game conference SEC schedule and also playing USC in the non-conference and for example, South Carolina playing Clemson in the non-conference, and then all everybody focuses on is the fact that they played Old Dominion or a team like that or the Citadel or some FCS school. That's fine. But I just think that's ridiculous. But at this point, we don't have to worry about it anymore because if this ends up happening, it sounds like the SEC is going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. And like Tyler said, because it's on their terms. And the reason being is the non-conference stuff, again, doesn't truly matter. When you were the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey, and you know for a fact, I've got 4 teams that are going to be getting in this dance, no matter what. You can play a 9-game conference schedule because then it's not going to be in the hands of this committee who's just looking, okay, so-and-so's got 11 wins and so-and-so's got 10 wins. That just tells me that the team that's got 11 wins in this other conference who played the shittiest schedule on the planet is just better than this team that's 10-2. That's because that's what they do. And that's not going to be the case anymore. There could be a 9-3 team from the SEC who played a really good conference schedule in the SEC and went outside the conference and played the Buckeyes or Penn State or somebody like that. And as long as they finish in the top 4 in the SEC, they're going to be in the playoff. Same thing for the Big Ten. If Penn State plays a tough Big Ten schedule and then they challenge themselves out of conference and go play in Death Valley at Clemson and lose that game, but if they finish in the top 4 in the Big Ten, they're going to be in the big dance. So they're more apt to want to schedule some of these non-conference games that will challenge themselves more because they're not going to be punished as much for it.
Yeah, it does sound like it's more even playing field, everybody playing non-conference games, and then obviously having one guaranteed crossover game with the other conference.
Yeah.
And then, probably 2 G5 schools in there. That's probably a reason to go to 16 teams versus 14 because then, the non-conference would matter a little more if you're getting 3 at-larges versus 1 at-large. I mean, you got 1 at-large team, like, okay, like who played the toughest non-conference schedule, who got the best non-conference win. That's really, you're really getting down to like, I mean, that's very subjective.
Let me ask you, man, do you think, what is the benefit of going to 14 instead of 16?
Yeah,
do you think
I don't know. I'm not sure why that's even being talked about. Honestly.
I agree, man. I mean, the only reason that's being talked about or should be being talked about is because maybe some people are just scared of going from such a big jump. We went from 4 teams and now all of a sudden we're going to be at 16 and just the sound of 16 just sounds so much more than 14. But the model itself and the format of 16 just seems like it works so much better than 14.
Yeah.
It just, to me, you're just delaying the inevitable again. What they just did, they went from 4 to 12. Everybody that covers this sport told everyone it's not going to stop at 12. So they should have went to 16 to begin with. And if they go to 14, then when this freaking thing ends at the end of 2031, they're going to be going to 16. It's just delaying the inevitable. So just quit dipping your toes in the water, man, and just flip in and let's go to 16 and let's dance.
Who says it's going to end at 16?
It might not. It might not. I mean, I hope it does for real because you really are getting to the point of devaluing regular season when you get to that much more teams. I'm still of the belief that even at 16, it doesn't devalue the regular season. It doesn't.
Let's go. All right. What other pros you got? Because I don't have any more other pros. I got a ton of cons to bring to you, but I got no more pros.
I think that the 16 team deal and ranking, like I know we kind of hit on it already, but the format itself of the playoff, I think would just look so much better when you're having your top ranked teams ranked 1 through 16 like that, and seeding them that way, like a true tournament is supposed to be seeded, and more home playoff games. I just think that, I know they haven't guaranteed that there'll be more home playoff games, but I think that would be the case. I think you'd have 2 rounds of home playoff games. And I just think that's a win for everybody.
Yeah.
And the last thing of this is when it went from 4 to 12, you and I talked about, and we gave examples, and it happened this past year. We now have a 1-year case study of it. That 2 years ago, when you and I first started doing this podcast together, when obviously we were talking about the 12-team playoff format coming, that when it was a 4-team format, dude, we brought it up when the calendar struck November, back when it was a 4-team playoff. There were like 8 to 10 teams that still had a shot to make the 4-team CFP. 8 to 10 fan bases in this entire country thought that their team had a chance to go dance and compete for a championship. This past year, there were like 30-something. The beautiful graphic that you put out on a week-to-week basis on our social media channels. There were like 30-something teams, man, well into November, that all still had chances to get in this 12-team playoff. And that, to me, man, just creates so much more interest across the board for the sport. Like, yeah, people want to say it creates a lot of arguments and debating. Yeah, it does. That's interest. That's what that is. And I think with 16 teams, obviously, it's going to create even more like interest in the conference races, man. People that love the SEC and Big Ten fans that just are obsessed with the Big Ten and love the Big Ten. And right now you're just waving your Big Ten flag, talking about how you're better than the SEC now and you've caught the SEC or whatever. Now if you're in the top 4 in your conference, you're going to go play for a playoff. So I just think it's going to create even more fan interest across the board of teams getting in a 16-team playoff as opposed to a 4-team or a 12-team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know there's going to be plenty of cons, so I can tell you were antsy and just like trying to jump through this screen and get me to shut up, which I know is a hard thing to do, to talk about the cons. So go ahead, my brother.
You got no more pros? That's it?
I feel like it's
only 21 minutes of pros so far? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You might have 40 minutes of cons here.
Oh, Lord.
No, I'm just kidding. If you look at Ross Dellinger's post on Twitter yesterday, or when it came out, a day and a half ago, whenever you saw it, tons of comments on it. Overwhelmingly, the majority were not positive comments. It talks of ruining the sport and, ruining the sport we love and blah, blah, blah. Whatever you think of it, we're here to tell both sides of it. My problem starts with the fact that no other sport that I'm aware of, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong. No other sport does multiple automatic qualifying bids at all. And if you can think of something here, let me know. And you add in the fact that...
Are you talking about per conference? Because like obviously in college basketball, every conference tournament champion that gets an automatic qualifying bid for the NCAA
Sure,
tournament.
I'm talking about per conference. No other sport does it multiple bids per conference.
Per conference, okay.
Yeah. Or like professional, whatever. You add in the fact that this sport has the lowest amount of regular season games played among all those sports. I disagree with you. I think the regular season is even more diminished than people were complaining about with the 12-team playoff. I think that by allowing 2 conferences to basically run and control and dictate this thing, and we'll get to the fact, obviously, those 2 conferences are the best 2 conferences in the sport of college football. You're devaluing wins in the ACC and the Big 12. And to be honest, I think you're devaluing wins in the SEC and the Big 10. You're saying you don't need to win as much of the games. Those teams were already getting the benefit of the doubt regardless in the format we just had. There were no other 3-loss teams discussed other than Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Like, not a word was said about 2-loss BYU that had a comparable, we talked about it, but nobody else said BYU had a comparable resume to SMU with a head-to-head win over them. All we heard was the crying about Alabama and Ole Miss. So I think to start off, the regular season is greatly diminished.
I don't know that the regular season is greatly diminished, but I see your point on the part of, like, the only thing I disagree with you on was when you made the comment about, like, the wins, like winning all your games or winning as many games as possible doesn't matter. I still think that obviously matters in these larger conferences because you got to get into that top 4. I do think that conference scheduling will matter even more than it does. Because like you talked about, like you were saying that like Florida and Texas, go look at those schedules this past year and go look at those schedules this coming up year. Like those two teams are in the same conference, and you would never know it by how different and more difficult the Florida schedule is than the Texas
we
schedule.
know Florida and Texas are in the same conference.
I can't believe there were people on X that did not understand that you were saying what you were trying to say with that.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. But I do see your point on devaluing wins from teams from the Big 12 and the ACC, because it took a while for me to come around, but I finally did come around on the part of what you just said. I know a lot of people, when you made the comment of, I mean, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama are already getting the benefit of the doubt. And a lot of your SEC fans, I'm one of them, I was one of them saying this as well. No, they didn't. They didn't get the benefit of the doubt because they didn't get in. No, they did get the benefit of the doubt. They got an extra mulligan. They were getting an extra mulligan as opposed to any other team. Let me tell you what I mean by that. To Tyler's point just now, 10-2 BYU literally wasn't even like on a graphic.
They were ranked 18th.
Yeah, you couldn't even find them on a graphic, and they had a head-to-head win over SMU, and they were 10-2. And their resume, if you actually look at it, as far as their ranked wins and things like that, and their strength of schedule, it was better than a lot of the teams that were ahead of them, including SMU. And like Miami wasn't even like they were ranked behind those SEC teams, and weren't really strongly considered for a spot. They were 10-2. If Alabama was 10-2, 100% in the 12-team playoff. If Ole Miss was 10-2, 100% in the 12-team playoff. South Carolina, same thing. So that is what Tyler is referring to by they were already getting the benefit of the doubt. It took them getting a third loss to still they were being considered for that 12th spot for the playoffs with 3 losses. So they had 2 extra mulligans compared to other teams. So now when you've got only 2 from the ACC and 2 from the Big 12, I'm not going to sit here and say that if I was a diehard fan of a Big 12 team, that I would not be upset with this. I would be. And there's a helmet right behind me here that says VT on it. I've got a lot of lineage in my family to Blacksburg, Virginia, and to the Virginia Tech Hokies. They're in the ACC, obviously. So a lot of people that are in the ACC that see this, I totally understand why anybody from the ACC would be mad or upset about this. I think the biggest problem I have with this, Tyler, is allowing 2 conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, to have such control over the whole sport in general. It just further creates the narrative and shows that we do need a voice that is like a commissioner that is in charge, that is looking out for the health and what's best for college football as a whole in general. And having the SEC commissioner and the Big Ten commissioner calling all of the shots because the ESPN and Foxes of the world are throwing as much money as they possibly can so they can gain control. You're digging a bad path there, man. I love the sport, and I'm going to watch it no matter what. But I get it, why there would be fans out there outside of the Southeastern Conference and the Big Ten that are upset and bothered by this. I completely get it.
That was my next point. I mean, no one seems to be looking out for the greater good of college athletics and in college football in particular. I mean, it's all about their own self-interest. And, we wonder why today's college athlete is the way they are, and like they don't really care about, which school they go to. They don't care about, representing, that crimson, helmet or that gold helmet or anything like that. It's all about who's going to pay them the most money. And people always, they're not short to criticize all these athletes for transfer and hopping in the portal. Like, look at the examples that they're given.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
These commissioners and these conferences are just trying to see how much money they can make their respective conference. And for those that all the rumors about the Big Ten and the SEC going to the Big Two, and even more conference expansion taking place. So this playoff format, in the political world now, you shouldn't believe in coincidences anymore because so many things just keep becoming true when these coincidences keep popping up. Tyler, do you believe it's a coincidence that this new playoff format contract is going to go from 2026 to 2031? And at the end of 2031, lo and behold, the ACC grant of rights is up for like ACC teams at that point can possibly move around and not have to pay a huge penalty to leave the ACC at that time. Do you think that that's a possibility, that that's a coincidence, that that's coming up at the same exact time? And by the way, the SEC and the Big Ten already financially are completely separating themselves from the other conferences financially because of the contracts from Fox and the contract with Big Ten and the contract of ESPN with the Southeastern Conference. You know what else these programs get a ton of money for? Making the college football playoff, making a national championship game. So when there's going to be 4 teams from the SEC and 4 teams from the Big Ten that get guaranteed spots, and all of those millions of dollars are going to those 4 respective programs to be split amongst the rest of the programs in the SEC and the Big Ten, that's even more money that they're going to be getting as opposed to the G5 or the Big 12 or the ACC. So at this point, man.
Yeah, somehow they all the ADs complain that they're operating in the red and they need more money from, donors to, pay for these rosters and all this stuff. Like with all this money
they're trying
supposedly.
Dude, in Georgia and Alabama, they're literally trying to make NIL money for athletes exempt from state income taxes. But the rest of the citizens in those states still have to pay state income tax on the money that they make. And they're asking those same citizens in those states to donate their hard-earned money to those programs so these athletes for these programs can not pay state income tax on the NIL money that people are just divvying out to these kids.
Yeah.
Wild, bro.
Yeah.
Wild concepts.
Yeah. All right, back
We're
to the
cooking right now, bro. We are cooking.
Back to the multiple AQs that I hate. My thing is the SEC and the Big Ten, they're going to get those spots anyways. Like they already got 58% of the teams that were in the playoff this past season. Like they're going to get that same percentage in the new models, right? I mean, they got 8 out of the 16 plus a couple more. You're at 50 to 60% right there. Everyone complained that this 12-team playoff dragged on way too long, right? Playing the game, your championship game on January 20th. Now we're going to add more mid teams to a playoff. And we're guaranteed to see teams that lose 25% of their regular season games make the college football playoff. And probably a 4-loss team, if we're being honest with it. I mean, 2024 showed us and showed everybody, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, we didn't need more. We probably could have gone to 8. I mean, let me ask you a question. Who did Kirk Herbstreit say did not belong on the field in the college football playoff?
11-1 Indiana.
11-1 Indiana. And in the new format, they'd match up against like an 8-4 Iowa team this past year. And if Iowa gets some lucky breaks and they upset 11-1 Indiana, Iowa's getting an automatic qualifying bid. 8-4 Iowa. Like, what are we doing?
I see what you're saying.
What are we doing? I know, again,
you're talking about if Iowa would get like the 4 seed. Oh, you're talking about if
they could be a 15, 14 seed, whatever.
You're talking about when the 3 plays 6 and 4 plays 5.
Yes, exactly. On the conference play-in weekend.
The 6 seed out of the Big Ten could possibly upset the 3 seed.
And I think if I looked at it, Iowa would have been the 6th ranked team, and
Ohio State was the 3.
Well,
no, you're right, because Ohio State lost 2. Ohio State lost 2. You're right, man. Ohio State lost 2 big. Indiana was the 3 because they only lost 1 Big Ten game. Yeah. So it would have been Indiana versus, more than likely, like you said, Iowa. And Ohio State plays Illinois.
Yeah. And we're going to give Iowa 8-4 Iowa an automatic spot. They still be a 13, 14 seed, right? 15 seed, playing a 4 seed. So still a tough round game. But like, come on. Like, what are we doing over here overall in the big picture of this thing?
Yeah, man, I didn't think about that. That's tough. Yeah, that's tough.
This is where Tony Reali would give me a couple points on my ticker.
Probably so. I don't know, man. I'm still of the belief that most years that again in those conference championship like the conference play-in games to get into the playoff, having de facto playoff games, I'm still for that. I think my point is you don't have to really earn it anymore. Like you get a 1-game play-in. Like, come on, like you even said Alabama didn't deserve to make that playoff last year, but in a 16 team they would have, and you want to give them one chance to win a game and get in the playoff after they looked like they looked, and then obviously seeing them in the bowl game pretty much fully healthy and fully prepared to play Michigan and just get embarrassed by Michigan. Like, yeah,
it's just you're gonna have years where like, yeah, you're 5th and 6th place team in the Big Ten and the SEC are like solid. Like you might have a SEC conference basketball type year this year where you got 6 of the top 8 teams, right? That could be the same case in football, and you just got team after team that is solid. But other years you're going to have down years. Like you're going to have a down year in the Big Ten. You're going to have a down year in the SEC. You just don't know what it's going to bring. So I just think overall, it's not a good look for college football.
Yeah, I think obviously we're still going to have debates, man, for who gets the 16th spots and stuff. And then if we went to 50 teams, there would be debates for who gets the 50th spot. I mean, good Lord, we have 68 in the NCAA basketball tournament, and every year the bubble teams, like we argue about who should get those last spots on the bubble. I think probably what this eliminates a little bit is like this past year, it does eliminate the debates of like Indiana still would be in, SMU would still be in this new format. SMU still gets
the
in.
Debates after the fact.
Yeah. The Alabamas, the South Carolinas, the Ole Misses, those teams would have gotten in and could have settled it on the field in a playoff format, in a playoff game. All of those teams would get in and could settle debates and settle arguments on the field. And yeah, if Alabama gets in and they go play Ohio State in Columbus right out of the gate and go get their cheeks clapped like Tennessee did at Ohio State, then yeah, we can all the Big Ten fans can bump their chest and talk about how the SEC wasn't as good as what SEC fans thought they were, or vice versa. If Ole Miss gets in and Jackson Dart talking all that trash about how if we get in this tournament, if you let us in this tournament, we're going to go on a run, and everybody just makes fun of him because they know he's not going to get in, well, Ole Miss would have been in this situation, and they would have had an opportunity to get in and go on a run and settle it on the field instead of everybody's favorite word, instead of settling it through stupid hypotheticals that nobody has a clue.
Yeah, I will say that is a positive. We should put that in the pros column. It's you can settle it on the field. I mean, you don't hear who's the perennial bubble team in college basketball, right? Syracuse. Syracuse always seems to find themselves on the bubble.
They really do.
And when Selection Sunday comes out, it's all about like, oh, who made it? Did Syracuse make it? Whatever. By the time those games tip off on Thursday and Friday, nobody's saying, "Oh, see, Syracuse should have been in. They should have been in over this team." Like, nobody's saying that. So I get what you're saying there. That they would have had a chance to prove themselves, and maybe Ole Miss would go on a run, right? Maybe they would get to the Final Four. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I just personally think that going from 12 to 16 or 12 to 14 is not going to devalue the regular season so much more. Where we would be in just completely uncharted waters would be so many automatic qualifying bids from these conferences. I see your point.
I think my point, talking about biggest cons, I think my biggest con is the multiple automatic qualifying bids. I mean, you know me, and I hate the whole my conference is better than your conference crap that we hear all season, off season, year round, whatever. Let's just get rid of auto bids and let's just choose the 16 best teams. Like let's reward the actual teams, not the conferences.
Yeah, I'd be okay. I'd be okay with that. And I think your problem with this though is that
the problem is we've got two conferences dictating the terms, so they're going to get what they want. Like Let's reward the teams, not the conferences. We already said they get 58 to 60% of the teams in there anyways because everyone is in agreement. Those are the two best conferences in the sport.
Yep.
So if everybody already knows that, why do you got to put in these floors for your conference? Like it's all about money, and it just drives me crazy.
Yeah, we've kind of beat a dead horse on this part. This is all about money.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody fool you. Don't let Greg Sankey and Tony Batiti and all them try to fool you and say that they know that their conferences are the best. They just want to be sure. There is no other reason, none, that they could be wanting 4 automatic bids per each conference, and then giving other power conferences only 2 each, because no other reason other than money. And I heard Greg McElroy say this the other day, and I agree with him 1,000%. I mean, you and I both work in the business world and stuff. We know how this works. It's all about leverage. And right now, unfortunately, the ACC and the Big 12 and the G5 teams and conferences have 0 leverage.
Dude, I'm absolutely shocked that nobody heard about this memorandum that came out with the SEC and the Big Ten having this control over this in 2026.
Yeah, me either.
And then B, how did the other conferences not call their bluff and just say, because that was the threat, I'm sure, that hey, you don't give us this, we're going to break off and do our own thing. And that was the threat. Like how did they agree to let them have control like that?
Well, again, man, here's the leverage part of this. And I know you already know this, but I'm just going to say it because, like, when you actually hear these names, what is the ACC and the Big 12 and all those conferences in college football? What is college football without Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, LSU, Georgia, and so on, Penn State? And we know what would have happened too. They would have taken Notre Dame with them. Notre Dame. There's the leverage, man. I mean, no offense, but Texas Tech and West Virginia and even Florida State and a lot of those programs, there's not enough of those programs to carry enough weight to do what you just said in regards to let's call their bluff and tell them if they want this and they want that, to hell with them. We'll go do our own thing. You can go do your own thing. That sounds good. And when you're making $5 and pennies on the dollar while the other ones are making billions of dollars because the ESPN and Fox and all these channels aren't going to pay for your product because they're going to pay for the product of all of those programs that I just mentioned, the conferences that have all of those programs. That was why the Big Ten swung their stick and brought in the Oregons and the Washingtons and USCs and UCLAs, and the SEC brought in Texas and Oklahoma. That was why they didn't go get Texas Tech and Kansas, because those programs that I just said that those two conferences got, they move the needle financially. They just do. It all comes back to, again, the almighty dollar and money. And I know there's a lot of people that has heard me say that and want to throw up in their mouth, and I get it. This is college football we're talking about. But get into reality here, folks. This is where we're at.
Yeah.
We both you've heard us, we both have a problem with the fact that money is driving everything.
It's because they don't have a direct leader, a commissioner like you were talking about, who's looking for the interest. And
we know where this is going, man.
College football is supposed to be about more than money. Like that's what the fans who truly love the sport for what it is, like, they just want to watch the pageantry and the passion and the intensity of the games and the rivalries and all that.
Yep.
It's supposed to be about more than money. When money gets involved, like it is, like it just pisses the majority of the fans off.
Yep. Last one that it is a pro. I should have mentioned this earlier. Rivalries. I think that more conference games will preserve that. There were games this year, man, in the SEC that I just can't believe as an SEC fan that I am that just didn't happen. Like, I can't believe as an Alabama fan that the Tide didn't match up with Ole Miss this year. And I know the Ole Miss Alabama isn't some big rivalry per se, but when you only play 8 conference games and you have 16 teams in a conference and you're rotating all these schedules year in and year out, the fact that you're going to play an extra conference game like that, I think has the better opportunity to preserve some of the bigger rivalries that us as fans want to see. Okay? Like, dude, I heard Fornelli and that bunch on Cover 3. Mm-hmm. Like, college football fans across the entire country don't necessarily sit around and think about Illinois versus Indiana. Okay, let's be real.
Yeah.
But Illinois fans and Indiana fans, that's a big deal to those fan bases. They want to see those two teams match up.
Yeah.
So when you have more conference games in these larger conferences, I do think that's going to have a better chance of preserving more of the rivalries and more of the matchups that we as fans like to see on a year in, year out basis and don't have to wait 4 years to watch those teams play each other again.
Dude, how many litigators and lawyers out there do you think are salivating over the fact that, like, yeah, we're going to try like crazy to get our teams into the Big Ten and the SEC?
Well, look at what Florida State and Clemson and those teams
Yeah.
have already been doing, man. They've been trying their butt off, which, again, it's not a coincidence, man, that the new restructured ACC deal, which that could be another podcast for another day, but just quickly summarizing that, they've restructured their deal with the ACC and the grant of rights to where, like, programs that have more eyeballs, that have more people watching them and have higher ratings and all of that, and they've built in like a success model to where if you do make the college football playoff and you win games in the college football playoffs, you do get to keep a bigger piece of the pie as opposed to just splitting it evenly with the rest of the conference, like the SEC does, for example, or like the Big Ten does, for example. So like if Clemson goes to and Florida State go to or Miami, whatever, they've got more fans and more people that watch their games than Wake Forest does. That's just obvious, okay? So when Clemson goes to the ACC championship game and then it ends up making it in the playoffs, and they're going to get to keep more of that money that honestly probably should be theirs instead of splitting it and giving an equal piece of the pie to your Wake Forests and to your Dukes and to your Boston Colleges and Syracuses. So that is already going on. And again, 2031 is when things are up for discussion again in the ACC with their TV deal and the grant of rights. And that is just not a coincidence that is when this new college football playoff format's contract ends. It's at 2031. And all the rumors that you hear everybody talking about, that they think that the Big Ten and the SEC are just going to be battling each other to see who's going to go get the best programs out of the ACC and the best programs out of the Big 12 and just form a Big Two. It makes even more sense now, the fact that the SEC and the Big Ten are the main two calling the shots for what the new rules are for the college football playoff.
Yeah. Speaking of keeping a bigger piece of the pie, a team you mentioned a couple minutes ago, it took us 40 minutes to even bring them up. Notre Dame. They're just sitting back as an independent, keeping in all their CFP money to themselves. Mm-hmm. There's a provision in the memo that comes out if Notre Dame's ranked in the top 14, they're automatically in. But obviously with the SEC going to 9 games and then, the crossover Big Ten SEC schedule, what do you think that does, if anything, to Notre Dame's schedule? They've got their agreement with the ACC where they get 5 to 6 games a year. They've got, typically an Army or a Navy. They've got the USC, the Stanford. But I mean, shoot, like if you're USC,
I was going to say, man, USC.
You're scheduled 9 games and then you get an SEC crossover. I mean, I guess they pretty much did that this year with LSU.
Yeah.
But that's a tough schedule. I mean, so,
shoot, if I'm USC,
you see rivalries like that die.
Dude, if I'm USC, I'm telling the Big Ten to kiss my ass on playing a crossover game against the SEC.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, we're going to play Notre Dame. And
I wonder if they'll make it like to where like you can throw Notre Dame into that pot. Like, okay, if you can play Notre Dame, and then like if you're a USC, you play Notre Dame, you don't have to play another SEC team.
I can't believe I'm saying this publicly, so make fun of me if you're listening to this. That's fine. But I'm going to ask Tyler a question here because I just went blank. Are there more Big Ten teams than SEC teams?
Yeah, there's 18 Big Ten teams and 16 SEC.
There you go. I thought there was. Wanted to make sure. So, with that being the case, that's easy. Yeah, USC can just be like, we're not playing one of those SEC teams. We're going to play Notre Dame. So, that answers that. But as far as the other ones are concerned, yeah. Like Notre Dame sometimes matches up with Michigan. They sometimes match up with your Michigan States. They just matched up with Ohio State in the regular season in a home and home. The last couple of years.
Arkansas this year.
Yeah. So, like, if you're the SEC and playing 9 conference games and you're playing a Big Ten team, I don't know how many people are just going to be lining up at the door to be like, oh, yeah, let's go also play Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And now we've got 10 Power 4 teams that we're playing. That's interesting, man. I didn't think about that. I definitely think their rivalry can be kept, obviously, with USC. That's going to be preserved. But in their 5 or 6 games, whatever, with the ACC. But outside of that, that will be, honestly, man, it's all driven by money. It's what it is.
Yep.
So I can promise you, ESPN and Fox are going to be going to the Big Ten and the SEC like, hey, yeah, schedule Notre Dame. Schedule the team with the largest alumni and the largest fan base on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be even more eyeballs and more money coming our way if we schedule Notre Dame in some of these games. So they'll with that being, and that's good, man. We're just talking through it here, like together. Notre Dame will still get some Big Ten and SEC teams because all they care about is money. So Notre Dame moves the needle, obviously, as far as financially is concerned, of matching up. And NBC getting Notre Dame when they play whoever at home, NBC gets that, piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
And when Notre Dame comes to the SEC or the Big Ten, that's going to be a boatload of money that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to make, Fox and ESPN are going to make for hosting the Fighting Irish on a television matchup.
Yeah, and they're going to get their 5 or 6 ACC teams, and more than likely, they've got. I mean, that's again, they're gonna have an extra mulligan. Like they still won't do the conference play-in weekend, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
They could lose 2 games and be in the playoff.
Oh,
like
10-2 Notre Dame's going to be in the top 14, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, and everyone's going to hate that because everyone hates the fact that they're independent. And I always say to everybody on our TikTok or Instagram or X, whatever you want to comment to us on, if being an independent was so easy, why doesn't everybody do it? All the Georgia fans complaining about being an independent, go play in a conference. Why don't you guys just come be an independent? Just make your own schedule. Why aren't you doing that, right?
Yeah,
because you can't.
I definitely used to be one of those people, and now that I've literally looked into it, like Notre Dame's allowed to be independent, and they're allowed to function very well as an independent because of their contract with NBC.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to go be an independent, you have to move the needle enough to get a television partner to want to televise all of your games, every single one of your games, like NBC does with Notre Dame. And there's not very many programs, man, that I think that would be able to move the needle enough to be able to do that.
Or you've got to have, like you said, you got to have people who want to come play you on ABC or Fox, and they want to pay the money to do that. But or you got to be UConn, I guess, right?
Yeah, there honestly, man, is only we're not going to go into who that could be, but there's only probably 4 or 5 teams that could possibly even remotely have a chance to be able to do it and succeed like Notre Dame.
And most of those 4 or 5 teams wouldn't want to leave the conference they're in because, that's a guaranteed moneymaker.
Yep.
They kind of have a floor built in there where Notre Dame's just independent. Like we said, they just go out and they make their own money.
Yeah, the 3 ACC teams like Florida State, Clemson, and Miami, no.
I mean, teams like Florida State, Penn State, Miami, like all these teams used to be independent. There's a reason that they all went and they joined a conference for that conference money, and Notre Dame didn't.
Yeah, there's probably 2 or 3 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams that have the brand and have the alumni and move the needle enough, brand recognition wise and stuff. I know there's a lot of fans out there that think that your team could do that. It's just not true, man. This is not true. All right,
I'm done with my pros and cons list. You got anything else?
Nah, man, I'm good. This was fun, dude. This was some good off-season college football pod talk. Hey guys, I'm gonna do the little the show stuff here. Follow us on our socials: Instagram, X, TikTok. We're on X at Always Talk Ball, at Always Talking Ball on Instagram and TikTok. Subscribe on YouTube. It's free, doesn't cost you a thing, and it helps us out a ton. We're not asking for freebies. If you don't like the show, you don't like this episode, and you listen to it, don't do it. But if you liked it, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment. If you disagree with anything that we said, come at us. We're grown men. We'd love to go back and forth with you. If you agree with us, let us know. And we're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can follow us along there. Hit that follow button. And you can listen audio only on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
All right, this was fun. We don't have to worry about this next year. Still be a 12-team playoff. One thing we will have to worry about is changing our ATB top 12 to an ATB top 16. So that's for way down the line in the future. So appreciate you guys tuning in. We will be back next week.